I first saw I'd never heard of you before, and then someone sent me that conversation that you did with is it Thaddeus Russell? Is that his name?
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh, you got to listen to this." And he sent me the hours, and then I listened to the whole thing. And you've lived a very interesting life.
I have. I noticed that you're recording, but
you want me to stop?
No. You don't have to, but you're more than welcome to record, and you're more than welcome to share this. But before we started, I had a dream last night, and you were in it.
Oh,
and it's so rare that happens, and the time that it happened and the way that it happened. I do dream a lot, but like the nature of sort of everything that occurred, and the quality of the dream was the type that I thought I would at the very least share it with you. It was just that, like, you should probably share this with Paul. It's so rare that I would have a dream about somebody that I've never met and that I would be about to speak with them. But so I'll tell you, and then if you want to keep it in, you can keep it in, and then if you want to leave it out, you can leave it out. But I just wanted to do that before we got started, so that I could get it off my chest.
Okay.
So I had obviously been thinking about us talking for a while, and I listened to your stuff, and I think that you are onto something that a lot of people are not onto right now, and that you have been obviously for a long time. And so, I was thinking about this conversation, and I think that in the way that I think it came up, I was like, well, it's very interesting. I want to make sure that I can communicate to Paul, like, my impression of him, and that I think he's important. And I was like, I don't know how to do that. So I'd prayed on it, thought about it, and I was like, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. Last night, I had a difficult night. Sometimes I've had these throughout my life, and I don't fight them, but it's like, where I was in a like hypnagogic kind of meditative state the whole time, and there was a lot of meaningful things happening. And I have a 2-year-old daughter who is still sleeping in the bed with her and her mom and me. And I recall on these nights, also my younger daughter, when she was around that age, there were times when I would have these, and just by the way she was moving, the way she was acting, it was almost like, wow, she's having the same dream or thing that's happening with me. And I don't know what that is. It's something to explore. It's something magical, obviously, something beautiful. Maybe they're little amplifiers or spiritual amplifiers because they're so open. Who knows, and it's flowing, whatever it is. She was having such a tough time with it. I had to pick her up and hold her a few times and walk around with her. And she was having such a difficult time that I was like, okay, around 2:00, I was like, I'm just going to get up and I'm going to go in the other room so she can sleep, because obviously whatever's going on with me it's a lot for her.
Yep.
So so I went into the other room and, just popped open my phone. I was like, oh, what am I going to do? Let me see what's, whatever. And you had released this, does Jordan Peterson have a plan thing? And I was like, perfect. I'll watch this thing from Paul, and then it'll be interesting. It'll take my mind off whatever's going on, put me in another state, and I can go back and go to bed. And it did. And I thought that it was a really interesting video too. And I think that it's right on. It's super interesting. And so I went to sleep. My alarm went off 5 a.m. on Wednesdays and Sundays. I go and do early morning prayers with a group of guys here on the beach. And my alarm went off for 5:00. I was tired and just hit the button on my phone to go off, and then I guess I fell back to sleep, and I had this dream. Now that's the setup for when I woke up out of the dream. Only 3 minutes had passed, so that's one of the things that tells me that time, that thing, and the quality of it, when those happen, those I always take note of, right? It's very different than the nature of other things. And I think a lot of people who have dreams of this sort say the same thing about that sort of lineup, right? So I will tell you what happened in the dream. What happened in the dream was you came to my house to record what we're doing. And we set up out where I'm on my deck out here, and we set up on my deck, and you got all set up, and I said, okay, let's go, let's record. And you said, no, let's go inside for a minute, and I want to meet your family. And so we went inside, and my two daughters were there, and not my wife, but my mother was there, which was like such a beautiful blessing, because I haven't been able to see her in person because we've been here for the last year on this island. And she's older, she's in California, and she's been going through a pretty serious health crisis that in the end analysis has also really brought her back to her own spirituality, which is kind of awesome right now. And so it's been beautiful to witness that, and it's also given me more of a sense of urgency about my own practice of prayer, you know. And so she was there, and it was very sweet. Like you were just very, very sweet. That's the best way that I could say it. And very interested in all of them, and very playful with my mother, and sweet to my mother, and sweet to my children. And, you know, my oldest daughter wanted to tell you about her budding relationship with Jesus. And you were very interested in that. And then I said, so we were about to walk out, and I said, Paul, like, you seemed more wanting to do that than to go and have this conversation that we were going to have. And I was like, Paul, this is very sweet. This is very beautiful. I'm enjoying this, but like, why do you not want to go have this conversation? And you said to me, and I don't think I can get the exact words right, but the basic thing that you said to me was, right now, what's happening is demanding of me that I take the next step on my journey. And this is difficult. And then I woke up. And so I wanted to share that with you. I thought that it was auspicious, and there was some stuff in there for me as well that was wonderful. And so it gave me a great feeling when I woke up, like, well, I'm gonna go talk to a friend, and that's fantastic. But also I wanted to just share that with you before we got started. So you can feel free to share that or not. I don't know whether that meant anything to you or whether that resonated with you, but
it does. And so, I wonder, I have an email in my inbox from a church that I often get inquiries from other churches that are like, oh, would you like to come and be our pastor? And I always say no. I've been here for 23 years, but it's no. And this, I wrestle with this in terms of what does this mean for me? This YouTube thing, a video that I recorded this morning that I'll probably release tomorrow. You know what? I don't know what a whole lot of this means. And if I wanted to just play things safe, the smartest thing to do would be to erase my YouTube channel, because this isn't safe. And by safe, I mean just sort of hunker down in who I've always been and not grow anymore. I'm, 10 years away, 10 to 15 years away from retirement. And just, preach safe sermons and retire. But that's not who I am. And I do believe that in order to follow Jesus, in order to do what God would want us to do, we have to take chances and risk, and we need courage. In the book of Acts, Jesus ascends in the first chapter, and then the Spirit comes down in the day of Pentecost in the second chapter. And then in the third chapter, Peter and John are in the temple and they're preaching, and they get arrested and they get hauled in front of the Sanhedrin. And the thing that strikes people about Jesus' disciples after the day of Pentecost, which was different from before the day of Pentecost, is courage. And we are living in times where we're in the middle of I think, a significant cultural transition in the West. And we need courage. And I don't say that as, say, one partisan on one side of a culture war. I think all of us need courage, because I think it's actually courage that enables us to confront our fears and speak honestly to each other. And what usually happens in a culture war is that all of the partisans are at least as afraid of their fellow partisans as they are of the other side.
Absolutely.
Because what's keeping you as a soldier is that if you turn, you'll get shot in the back.
Yes. Yes.
And so I know church culture is such that you usually don't win points for courage. You win points for not changing anything. And I'm in a context of change. That strategy, I don't think, is a faithful one. So I do what I do, and I really appreciate your dream. I've had dreams myself at times where, well, that was significant, I should listen to it. Others have had dreams about me that they've shared with me, that, and often the case is that when there's one like this, which I will remember, and I will definitely keep it recording, and I will play it, because that affords a level of accountability.
Sure.
Years later, you think back on that dream, and that's really sort of the test,
Sure. Absolutely.
Does that, and that's the test for so many things. Does it last? We have these brilliant ideas in the moment, and a year or two later, that was a dumb idea, because it doesn't last. The things that last are, we should be paying more attention to the things that last than always the shiny new thing. So no, I appreciate that. And I that's exactly, I mean, if I were able to be on your little island, I told my wife about your little island. She says, let's move there. I said, oh, hang on. But that is exactly, I am a pastor, and I would want to come in and meet your family, and I would be delighted to meet your mother and to hear her stories, and to I mean, this is what pastors do. And a lament of just this new internet reality I live in is that, we're two talking heads talking to each other, and this, except for a few emails, this is our first conversation. And to me, most good first conversations leave me wanting more of the other person, a better view in terms of, who has God made this person to be? What is God doing in their life? And what will God do with them? And so I really appreciate that. Thanks. I'm glad you had the dream, and thanks for sharing it.
Yeah, I appreciate you. I appreciate you showing up in that dream, because it gave me a chance to be in the same room with my mother, which is wonderful. So whatever role you played in that, and I think we probably all play a bigger role than we know in, a bigger role than we know in the spiritual sphere. And so, and you've been playing a role. So I appreciate that. And I think, it's a good, I think it's interesting that you say that we should be paying more attention to those things that last, because I feel like that is the underlying driving force for me in this new phase of my life. And I've had these many phases of my life, and this one, like tradition with a capital T, seems to be the word. And that it is about, you got big problems. We've got millions of years of, Peterson would say billions of years of solutions, right? And that's kind of the Jordan Peterson thing.
Yeah.
But it's like, So if you want to know what the solution is, you should maybe look at what, I'm going to say traditions, but this includes institutions, schools of thought, ideology, belief systems, whatever it is, traditions that have survived to this day after having passed through a similar storm.
Yep. Yep.
And then that's what you'll look at.
Yep.
And that is, yeah, I know that in our sort of initial interaction and why I reached out to you, that there's this, and I think that that's I hope what we can explore, and I'm happy to talk about like my journey to this point, but like in the context of experience. And I think that the interesting part about that dream is that is my, like, that experience is not a foreign experience to me, that entire experience of that night. And it's something that I actively seek. It is my language of spirituality through which God and other things, you know, when I've chosen to let those things in, which I have in the past, for better or worse, that other things have used to communicate with me as well. But that God is always doing that. And I know not everybody has that. And I think, you know, since I reached out to you when I heard you mention my talk with Thaddeus Russell, and I heard it was actually very good because, you know, you mentioned something and you presented my position in a way that I was like, oh, wow, am I being imprecise? Am I not being careful here in terms of how I am presenting myself and my position? Because if Paul, who is a scrupulous listener and has the background, is hearing something come out of my mouth that I'm not saying at all, and that I don't believe and that I'm not representing in any way, then, oh God, how many people who are who are the people who are out there who are not that level of sophistication, who might hear this and then go down that path and then say, well, Vin sent me down this path. And that really shook me. It shook me because I've been trying to be careful, but I've also been trying to be honest at the same time. But how do I know what I'm saying? Right. Yeah. Like, I mean, I speak with my spiritual father, who's a Serbian Orthodox priest. But he's already in the celestial fight. You know, he's to him, the things like, it's like he's in the ring, you know, he's my trainer in the ring, but it's like, no, but what does it look like to the audience who might want to emulate Vin? Yeah. You know, and so it's like, he sees it in the ring and he's like, yes, have that fire. You know, yes, we're in it. We're in the mix of it. Like, and let's go deeper, you know, and that's, I think, what can be expected from a mystic, you know, from a Christian mystic. Yeah. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, but those people in the audience don't understand that this is part of the performance of the spiritual combat that you are going into. And if they take this on for themselves without that same background, it's not going to go well. You know, so it's like, I do appreciate that. It was a blessing, really, that, you know, you just honestly said, I found it interesting. And what I got from you is like, yeah, but this guy's he's going down this weird path, you know? And I was like, oh God, if that's what's being heard from me, we've got a problem. So I think that there is something here in terms of, and I've become more careful about it in terms of, I'm trying to communicate my experience in the world and my experience with Christ. And it is very experiential. And my experience with the spiritual realm has been very experiential. And it's not been something I have sought out. It's been something like what I said last night. It just finds me. For whatever that is, it's there. I have these experiences, and I've had experiences that are, yes, the heavens open and things happen sober, right? Sober. I have had those. I know not everybody does. but I don't want to so I hope that we can talk about, because it seems like this is something that's the undercurrent of perhaps what this conversation can be, is a great education for me of how I can speak publicly about these things without demanding, or people feel that I am demanding, that they have the same experiences that I have in order for them to come to Christ, to come to the fullness of whatever they're going to come to. Because I don't think it's necessary, and I'm not asking for it, right? So I mean, so with that, I mean, I'm happy from a background standpoint to talk about that, but I wanted to give some context, and I think, and again, where does it find me? It finds me going to the church and going to a traditional church. It doesn't find me saying, oh, Holy Spirit came down, told me something. Let me open up shop on the corner and start Vin's, Vin's church of whatever it is, and tell you all these things. That is not what I'm here to do. And as a matter of fact, if I wasn't being told every day that I need to speak in prayer and that I need to bear witness, if I wasn't being told that, believe me, I would be very happy to not be speaking. Like, people can look at my YouTube channel. Do you see me doing videos on my YouTube channel? No. Anything you've seen of me in the last 3 years has been other people asking me to come and speak to them. And there's a lot of it. Unless I'm asked to speak by another human being or by the Most High, I am fine to sit. I'm happy, I'm happy. So
that's really helpful. That's really helpful. And I mean, I had no idea who you were. And so I'm glad that you sent me the email, because I did not want to in any way misrepresent you. But part of the liability of this disembodied image world that we are living in right now is misrepresentation. And, part of what, maybe when COVID is done and Fancy Nancy is back on the channel with her son, Freddie, Nancy always gives the sermon report. And I'll tell you, you learn about the pitfalls of communication as a pastor, because just wait till after the service and ask someone, so if you had to summarize that sermon in a sentence, what would you say? And then they'll say something, and it's like, on one hand, you might get upset and say, I never said that, or maybe you did. But on the other hand, you just have to say, wow, there's a lot that happens in communication. It is not a straightforward thing. So I found your conversation with Thaddeus Russell. I mean, the whole Bitcoin thing was, I mean, and the Bitcoin and your island, and I mean, that was what most of that conversation was about. And that was all. I so often feel like a babe, because even though I'm already well into my 50s, I sit down with my buddy Rick sometimes, and he'll say, oh, I've been watching this. And it's like, there's more in the world that I'm unaware of. and I can just, in whatever time the Lord gives me here, I'll just have this tiny little slice of this enormous world. And then, who is this guy? And it was clear that you were talking, that you were expressing Christian faith, but there are other elements of it. And I'm, also as a pastor, in terms of these last 3 years, nobody before this had ever come and talked to me. It doesn't mean it never happened, but talked to me about psychedelics. Most of the drugs that I've dealt with have been, alcohol, pot, and all of the other street drugs that are commonly around here. And then it was only when Jordan Peterson came along, and then the psychedelics, and then I had people contacting me and telling me, and there's like, whoa. So we can talk about that kind of stuff too. But as always, part of the reason, and people sometimes like it, sometimes get annoyed, but part of the reason I always start with people's stories is because I want to know who I'm talking to. And again, even if just a little bit, but because people will talk to you, and then they will tell you something, and you begin to realize, oh, what we see of each other, so much projection. And they'll say one thing, and it's like, wait a minute, you're a totally different person than I thought you were. And it's really important to make that transition and let them change in your head. But it's a complex thing. So that's So I had never heard of you, and again, someone just on Twitter said, "Oh, Paul, you should listen to this." And people do that all the time. Half the time I don't get a chance to, but it just so happened that I was going to Costco, and I usually try to listen to something while I'm shopping, and oh, this sounded interesting, and it was like, well, here's and so anyway, so where did you grow up? And what was the house like? I mean, you talked about your mother already. What was growing up like for you?
I grew up, I would say, what I remember, I was born in DC, but I grew up in Silicon Valley until I was how old? About 7. And then my parents moved back to the town that they were both raised in. I'm
Okay.
not sure whether they met there or not, but San Bernardino, California. So I'm
Okay.
a native Californian. My family's been there for 6 generations now.
Wow.
So they've been there a very long time. On both sides, they've been there a very long time. And so there's a big extended family there. Both my parents are pretty, their families are relatively well known. And my father's Black, my mother's Mexican. And that's I think that's an important context for California in the 80s, I would say, Southern California in the 80s, and this
Yep.
particular town. So right now, San Bernardino, last I knew, and this is pre-COVID, is the poorest city in California. So the Air Force Base shut down when I was a kid, a few years after we got there, and it just went downhill from there. So it's pretty bad, pretty bombed out. It's worse now than it was when I was a kid. There was still kind of a lot of the old foundation there. It wasn't as dangerous. It started to get very dangerous in my teens. So that was it was actually the murder capital of America for years when I was in high school. I'm baptized Roman Catholic, by my mother's side. So an uncle who my mother's very close to was a Jesuit, pretty high up. He passed away recently, and he baptized me. Was not really raised in the Catholic Church. My father and his family are Episcopal, so that's pretty much what I was brought up in. So there's a similarity and a closeness there. I was an altar boy, went through all of that, and I did enjoy that, except I did not enjoy Sunday school. I wanted to be in the real service. The Sunday school was, to me, was just, why am I here? Can I go in where it's really where the action is, you know? And my mother was very, from as far as I can remember, my mother is a highly, what would I say? She's a highly spiritually attuned person. Her father was very close to nature. He was a hunter. He was a gunsmith. When she was growing up, he hunted for their food. His best friend was this like Native American guy, and they would go out and do whatever it was that they were doing spiritually. She was incredibly, because she's actually named after him, incredibly close to him. And so, and he was definitely a mystic in every way, and he fully lived it. He had a bobcat as a pet when he was younger. There's all kinds of legends about him running down. He didn't have money, so he would run down jackrabbits in the desert to eat. He would run the rabbits down until they were tired, and then he'd hit them, to have food for his family. There's all kinds of legends. He's like a legendary figure. And he became very well known, ended up buying a lot of land, small little houses and whatnot. And then, he and my grandmother, my mom was like, when her and her brother took over a lot of these properties, they were like, they hadn't charged this family rent for like 30 years. They just like let them move in and they never charged them. And it's like, well, what do we do? I guess we got to just give them the house. You know what I mean? Like, what do we know? It hasn't been earning us any money. We didn't even know we owned this, and it was just time and time and time again. And so he's just this kind of legendary figure. And but my mother is not religious, but she is so tied in. even to this day. And so, you know, I remember growing up, and dreams were a big part of things, but I remember waking up and I would tell my mom, I had a future dream. I remember this. And she was like, oh, okay, tell me about it. And, you know, then things would happen. And she would even be like, oh, look, it's your future dream. And so like I would have, even as a child, these, it was just so normal. I thought, Mom, I had a future dream, and I would know the quality and nature of the dream that like, oh, and then it would happen. And so that was growing up. And you have this sort of juxtaposed with going to school. And so the town that I'm in is a pretty religious town, but it's like fundamentalist. It was founded by Mormons. So San Bernardino, California is it was bigger than LA before the Mormon Wars started and all the men went back. But the Mormon population there is absolutely huge. And so there was Mormons, and there was a lot of fundamentalists who were there. And so while I was in church doing the Episcopal thing, floating around, and I'm sure you remember these terribly scary old little comic books that they used to give to kids. I forget the name of them. Chick flicks. That would have these crazy depictions of hell and all of these. Yeah. And so at the same time, you know, and obviously this is not what's going on in the Episcopal Church, right?
They don't do chick tracks in the Episcopal Church.
No. So, you know, then good friends of mine who are fundamentalists are handing me these things, and I'm like, okay. So I'm like, well, if this is the case, I'm not going to church anymore. And this is a time my parents are getting divorced as well. Oh, very, very brutal, psychologically very bad divorce. You know, I think I was 7 years old, something like that. And my father is also very spiritual, and in the sort of mythological way. So it was even very early on that he was like, you know, when the book Iron John came out and the whole mythopoetic thing, that it's a pre-Peterson. This is decades, this movement, right? The nascent movement of this. Yeah. And so he and I always had a very tight relationship. And the hero's archetype and the proper role of a man and all of these things shown through a mythological standpoint was always very big for him. So he's a big athlete. I was always very much involved in sports. He was very tight with me as a spiritual mentor. And he said some things to me that have altered my life in terms of the way to approach things. And he also, you know, later on in his life, he passed away earlier in 2020, but he said to me, you've always had this tight spiritual connection, and like that's why I have no concerns or worries about you, you know. And then he remarried, and from about that, he moved to Orange County, California, and from about the age, the woman that he remarried is an evangelical. And so she comes out of like the Baptist church, but she, you know, I saw her recently because they had a child. So I have a half brother, and I saw her recently, and she was talking about how enamored she is with Joel Osteen. But before that, it was like, you know, all of the televangelist preachers from the 90s, the big guys, and then predictably they wound up at Saddleback Church. And so, well, we were in South Orange County. We were in Mission Viejo. And so we started going to Saddleback Church when the church wasn't built, when it was at Trabuco Hills High School in the gym.
The early days. And youth group was out by the pool. So the youth pastor would be preaching which is so typical Orange County megachurch, right? He'd be preaching by the water. All right, dudes, you know, what's cooler than it? And it's like, oh God. And, you know, we're all sitting in the bleachers where people would be watching the swim team or water polo or whatever. Sure.
And for me, my experience, and mind you, during this time, I'm also getting onto the internet. My dad is a tech entrepreneur. So he was always providing me with technology. And so I was getting onto the internet, and I was seeing all this alternate spirituality. I had started in on meditation. I was doing lucid dreaming. I was doing astral projection. And I was having these incredible results and these incredible experiences. And I was like, ooh, this is very real. Like all of this is very real. This is way more real than any of this stuff that's happening at church. Like this is, and I knew that what was being said at church was real. Right. So I did not have a doubt about the spiritual realm. And I think that's kind of an important aspect of me. So I did not have any doubt that what they were saying was real. What I had a doubt about was you haven't been there.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yep.
And I'm going to these places. So I need to find either somebody, some method, something to get there, because all I see is a bunch of people talking about something that I know is right. But I also know that some of this is wrong. And like, so in my recent book, I did this kind of like intro where I was trying to explain this. And I said that it's something like, you know, you could have the greatest archaeologist, the greatest Egyptologist, like a Zahi Hawass. People will even know his name, right? Like the great Egyptologist, Zahi Hawass. And it's like, he could tell you all these things about the antiquities of Egypt. And he could walk you through the museum and tell you, oh, this is this, this is this, this is this. And he's so educated and so well known. Or you could pull an Egyptian slave, a 12-year-old slave, forward in time and have him walk through the museum, and he'd be like, that's wrong, that's wrong,
That's true.
that's wrong. An illiterate slave, no, he doesn't know, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. And so what I saw were these very talented and good salesman archaeologists. And I was like, just point me to a slave who's been there. Tell me how to get there. Because I'll go there. I'm willing. Whatever you say, I'll go there. Because I know this is true. But like, I want to experience this. And so it has been a journey for me to get to that point. And on the road, let's just say on the road there, I've met a lot of things in that space. And some of those things are very convincing. And I will say directly because of meeting those things, and now I understanding that all organized by the Most High to get me there, that this is part of the path, right? That it's like, I've led a very interesting life. And I've been, let's just say in some ways, I might say that I went into the wilderness and was tempted by the adversary, and I said yes. And I've got the receipts. All you got to do is Google my name if you want to see the receipts. And I was actively knowing that that's why I was getting the things that I was getting. And then I say that my daughter and my wife saved my life. Because I met my wife, she's Russian, and she struck me completely different than anybody ever had. And I said, if I am going to have children with anybody, I had never met anyone. If I'm going to have children with anyone, it's going to be this woman. And I'm going to take this process particularly slow. And it wasn't lust filled, and it wasn't any of that. It was different. Let's just put it like that. Right. And you know, our first daughter, I really had to decide if I was going to still reach out to the same powers that I had reached out to, or at least be, even not, if not reaching out, at least not be vigilant and allow them to walk around in my world. And my decision was no, because I'm not deciding for just me anymore. It's okay if I'm deciding for just me, but I'm not. And so that's been definitely a path of exploration. I felt much more guided. My daughter is 5 years old now. So during that period, the first was sort of shedding the active, let's say, reaching out for that. And then it's like, let me rely on myself, but keeping, let's say, some of the bad habits of the past. And then I finished my second book in 2017. And during that process, there was something about the end where it was like this render unto Caesar story from the Gospels, was speaking out to me. I was very involved in Bitcoin at that time. I was working on Bitcoin. I saw that this was something different.
The books are about Bitcoin?
No, so my first book is called Dao of the Gigolo. And so I wrote that in 2011, and it's kind of like a metaphysics of value. I was like, well, so for people who don't want to Google me, I was a straight male. Yes, I was a straight male escort, and wound up as the star of basically a cult hit TV show on Showtime that was on for 6 seasons called Gigolos, and became very famous. I mean, more famous than I wanted to be, uncomfortably famous, to the point where I could not go anywhere in public without somebody stopping me. And this includes, I mean, being stopped on the street at 12:30 in Prague by some security guard who was watching some construction happening in a store, jump off the thing, run into the street, grab the woman that I was walking with, both of us drunk, and start speaking to her in Czech. And then she says, come on, let's go. And I'm like, what was that? What was that? And she goes, oh, he didn't want me to say it in front of him, but you're his hero.
Huh.
And this was happening all over the world. And so, and I was doing what I was doing, right? But I was approaching it I was not approaching it in a wicked way. I was approaching it very much as a healing modality. And whether I achieved that or I didn't achieve that, whether what was working through me was good or not, I know that many of the clients that I had and many of the people who encountered me on that show have told me that it absolutely changed their life for the better. So that's good. Right. But did it change me for the better? In the long run, yeah, I've got a lot of scars to show for it, physically, emotionally, spiritually, but I ask for all of it. It's not like I'm no victim. I asked for I waded into battle and I asked for every single bit of it. And so that obviously had to end, right? When my daughter came along and everything. And so that my first book was Dao the Gigolo. I was early in that process, and I was exploring. It's really an exploration of value. That it's like, why am I being paid? Because people were saying this is fake. People were seeing this and saying this is fake. And I thought that was very interesting, because I was like, I don't understand. Look at my bank account. Walk with me this is super real. Like, everything that's happening here is super real. Everything that you're seeing, this is probably the most real thing. And you can't appreciate that. You think it's fake. Reality is much bigger than you think it is. And it was like, why are these women paying thousands of successful, we're talking CEOs, A-list celebrities. We're talking all kinds of women who were saving up for months to have this experience. Why are they doing this? To just basically, and to date me is basically what it was, to go on a date, because it's like, women are not like men when it comes to this profession.
All right.
A woman's not going there to sleep with a guy. She's going there to hopefully to have love at first sight, because otherwise nothing's going to happen.
Yeah.
And that was often the case with many men in my industry who are not successful. And so why? What is it? What have I done in my life? And I had been kind of in the pickup artist scene, but I had viewed it very differently as a form of self-improvement, seeing myself through the mirror of these people's interactions, what is really valuable in society, and all of this. And so that's what my first book is about. My second book is called Self-Ownership, the Foundation of Property and Morality. And it's an exploration of the concept of ownership itself. And it's a philosophy book. I would say it's kind of an economics book. Where I ended was basically, if you dig far enough back into these property rights and all of this and where it comes from, you wind up at the mystery. And you want, well, and I was in the libertarian scene and very much involved. And so it grew out of that. But spiritually, I was like, well, yeah, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their creator with these rights. The whole experiment, the whole thing hinges on the creator. Yeah. It hinges on the endowment of the breathing, the spirit of life into us, and in so doing, endowed us with a piece of him. And so it really ends on that. But I also was heavily involved in cryptocurrency. That book has only ever been sold for cryptocurrency. It's done very well. It's actually done better than my other book, which is on Amazon for longer. It's done very, very well. It still sells to this day. I just mailed off signed copies yesterday, right, from out of here to people. So, but this Render Unto Caesar story showed up. And it was like, yeah, man, gosh, this is like, is this a prophecy? Like, I'm working on Bitcoin and I'm like, render unto, because the whole thing about show me the coin, whose name and picture is on it? Caesar's, render unto Caesar. But render unto God that which is God's. But then it's almost like, wait, have we reached a point where the name and face of God is on a money? Like, wait a minute. Is this a deeper thing? Like, is this a prophecy here? Is this not just a metaphor? Is this to potentially say that were there a money that could be rendered unto God, that would be the money upon which you could begin to build the kingdom of heaven? Like, would that be the money of the kingdom of heaven? Like, of course it would. And Bitcoin, and I teach a class called Bitcoin Mystery School now that is like, it's the mystical side of it. It's not about this number go up. It's not about, Bitcoin is not what anybody thinks. I've been working deep. It's my full time. That's my full time. And deep and at a mystical level of it. I'm not doing the things that other people are doing. And I've introduced a lot of things that people didn't know were even possible in terms of protocols that I've written and all of these things. And so that kept coming up. And that became, from 2017 to now, it forced me to go back into scripture. It forced me in saying, yeah, this is going to be the next, this is the jumping off point for the next book. What is this about? Like, and then, so my exploration professionally also led to that. And it was in that process, specific to sort of where I am now, digging into the scriptures, trying to explore, and then running but being like running up against that same wall, right? The same wall of, they haven't been there. Who's been there? I need to go to this place now. Like, I'm being called to this place now. I can't go, like, who's been there? And it was like, crazily enough, running across Derek Prince, old videos of Derek Prince, this well-known Pentecostal, I would call him, he's a Pentecostal shaman, I would call him. I mean, it's straight up mystic, right? Deep. He's passed away years ago, but there's so many of these videos of him. And it was in that, and I didn't know much about Pentecostals. Like, my experience with Pentecostals had been like the Salvadoran Pentecostals that run around LA. They're very different. And I think that, it's not, I never had experience with the Southern Pentecostals for sure. This guy happens to be British, which gave it a whole other flair. And so, it was him that said, the first time that I had ever heard, and I was like, I was like, God, yeah. He was like, Jesus, his ministry, casting out demons and healing the sick. I was like, wait, that actually is Jesus's. He's like, yeah, Jesus cast out demons and healed the sick. That's what he did. That was his ministry. That was the embodied ministry. We can talk about his words, right? But people were not, the words were ancillary. It was like, they came for the healing and they stayed for the sermon.
Oh, that's true.
Right? And the thing is, that's totally true.
Yeah.
They came for the healing. And so that was and it was also the first time that I realized I haven't read a single gospel through as a narrative in my life. I've read pieces. I know the stories. I know which stories and how they differ in the gospels. I mean, my formal education is in philosophy. And so, and Genesis I knew, as a narrative and had done a lot of work during that particular period. There's some other things going on. The adversary can tell you some things about Genesis and his role in that, and there's some stuff in there, like he played a big role in that too. And, there's his story is in there too. And yeah, I was definitely swayed by that at a certain period of time. And now I realize that it's like, his story is in there too, but that's part of the whole thing. That's part of your choice, right? It's a real choice. And so I went and I started reading the Gospels as a real narrative. And then one of the things that Derek Prince is adamant about is fasting. And like water fasting. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to start fasting. And then it turned out that there were people in my life who were fasting that I had no idea. And it like randomly would come up with a business colleague or something. And so there were some people to help me. And so I did a 3-day fast, couple of those, and just had amazing results. And actually like things that I had been working on and thinking on, this protocol that I developed that's very powerful, that I'm even working on stuff now that has really enabled me to continue bringing in income since I've been here over the last year, just came to me whole cloth in a fast. And in the first 3-day fast that I did. And then I did a 7-day fast towards the end of February. My father passed away. He passed away while I was like in a fast, kind of unexpectedly. And then I did a 7-day fast. A couple weeks later, there were some things going on in the community that I'm a part of in Bitcoin. And I was like, the proper answer for me, people were looking to me for answers. And I was like, the proper answer for me is to fast. And I'll let people know that I'm fasting. And if they want to fast alongside, they can. And dozens of people did. And it was beautiful. And so I did a 7-day fast. And it was a water fast. And it was a difficult but very rewarding experience. And I think, it was God clearing me out for what was about to come. And because then March, my fast ended on the 1st of March of 2020. And then March. And we all know what March 2020 was.
Yeah. Well, and then you also moved to Saipan.
Probably because of that. I mean, we got here on April 5th, but we had basically decided at the end of March. So we left. And everything since I've been here has been put in place for me to have and develop a system of prayer, and then to expand that in a way that is very personal for me, but then is totally in line with everything that then, I was delivered this beautiful spiritual father that it's like that question about who are you going to send me? It was one of those where it's like, look, I'm going to build you the prototype. I'm going to build you the one you can't deny. And I'm going to put him right in front of you. And it's like, seriously? Like, so he's a Serbian Orthodox priest, but he's a Black former tattoo artist who was in the punk scene from Orange County, California, who also will say, I became a priest and I'm, and I have my challenges because of my former master. So he had gone through the same thing that I had gone through and came out the other side. And so he knows what's up. And it's like, wow, you're going to deliver me the guy, huh? Like the guy who's going to get me, who's my spiritual father and my brother at the same time. And it was a level up in my prayer. And he came, it was through my Bitcoin mystery school. He was actually in the very first class of people that I taught, which was a group of men from an Orthodox parish in St. Louis who reached out to me and were like, could you do a private class of this? We're very interested in this. We think Bitcoin's going to be very important for us. And wait,
never would I have guessed any of that sentence.
Let me go further. The idea to even do this class, which is weird on its face, to even say, oh, I'm going to do this Bitcoin mystery school class, was literally dropped on me whole cloth coming out of prayer. walking back to my home on the beach from out of prayer. And it was like, it was quite simply God. And having had the experiences that I've had, I know the difference between my voice and a different voice. Let's just say that, which is very helpful, by the way, in prayer, because all of my prayer is just a practice of listening. And then, where is it? Where is it? There you are. There you are. Okay. What are you saying? And then clearing out the noise, right? And so it was dropped on me whole cloth. This is what you're going to do. You're going to do this course, and this is exactly what it's going to be. It's going to be 3 days. It's going to be just like this. You're only going to allow a limited amount of people. It's going to cost this amount, and you're going to just go and do it right now. Market it right now. And don't do anything crazy. Just put it out on your Twitter that you're doing it. And it's the first one, like, that I announced it. Before I had even announced it, this group was already wanted to do a private session. It's sold out. And it was just like, wow. And it was also at a time where I was wondering about, like, what income stream is there going to be for me as this thing continues, right? Like, something to consider. There's no work here. There's certainly no software work. And so it was like, I'll just hand it over to you. You got me. All right. Whatever you want me to do, I'm going to do it. And so since then, it has been, for me, a level up. I've been communicating to people the things that I've been given and the things that I'm seeing. Enough of what's going on. I knew, because I know these archetypes. You know, I tell people I lived inside of a myth. You know, being on a reality show, I know how these patterns lay out for people. So 2020 was obvious to me of where we would be right now. And people, I would say things, they would happen, and people then decided that they wanted to hear what I had to say. And all these podcasters and everything started reaching out to me, and they wanted to have these conversations. And then people were like, oh my God, this is explaining what's going on better than anything else. And it was just like, every time somebody asked, I would say yes. And every time I had a little bit more. And at the same time, you know, I had maybe a third of my current book, which comes out on the 21st, the Render Unto Caesar book. I had maybe a third of it done. And then through this practice of prayer, it was like every morning it was just being dumped on me. It was like, here you go. Here's what you're writing today. Here you go. Here's what you're writing today. Here you go. So I would come off the beach after morning prayers, sit down, boom, knock it out. Boom, knock it out. Boom, knock it out. And so the book just came together. And then when it was done, it was done. And it was like, okay, that's it. It's done. Okay, put it out. And but I will tell you that it has been miraculous and magical since I've been in this process, and God's got it. Like, the Most High is just, and this is why I tell people that it's like, I and this will probably rankle you a bit, but like, I call myself an atheist, because I say, well, a theist is someone who believes in God. That's the definition, right? And an atheist is someone who doesn't believe in God. I say, well, that's the inappropriate term for me. That's like asking me, do I believe in the existence of God? Do I believe in the existence of my children? That's not the right word. Like, I interact with them every day. I don't believe in the existence of God. That's not the appropriate. And it's not just God. I don't believe in the existence of the Trinitarian God. It's not about, like, what do I say? I believe in the existence of Paul Vanderklay. That would be a weird thing to say. And I've never even touched you. I've never even met you. I've never even seen you do any work in my life. You could be a deep fake. I've never had you could.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
But yet, for me to say that I believe in the existence of Paul Vanderklay would be imprecise. And so that's why I tell people, like, I'm an atheist who prays to the Trinitarian God every day in earnest. You know, so that's my story, Paul.
That's your story. That's well, I must say, I haven't heard a story quite like it. which is why part of why you grabbed my interest. So you mentioned, you know, where things are at. Well, what do you mean by where things are at right now? What do you see?
Do you mean in the world?
Yeah.
Or do you mean in my life? I guess they're the same thing.
Well, yeah. I mean, the world is surrounding you. I mean, each of us, is surrounded by the world in one way, but you said, you know, where things are at. And so I was curious when you said that, okay, well, what are you seeing right now? I mean, you're writing books, you're doing classes on, you know, that have to do with Bitcoin,
Mhm.
and just listening to, you know, some of your, you know, you're to philosophy. And I mean, Bitcoin is not just something that you can dump money in.
No.
It's an avenue of your perspective on what's happening. And we're, you know, we are in a, it's hard. I was just listening on it. I was just driving back from a meeting with somebody, and I was listening to the Peterson Brett Weinstein talk. And you know, part of what Peterson was saying, which he was very right on, is that we 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 as human beings can't take too much change in terms of what we see. And I'm just going to extrapolate on that. So what we do basically is we project. And so we project about everything around us to see. I mean, we are projecting most of the world around us. There's just these tiny little incongruities that we allow to peep through. But we are in a time and a place where change is happening around us at an accelerated pace, and it is accelerating further. And so most of what we try to do, and I see this on lots of different levels, most of what we try to do is just sort of keep covering that stuff up, keep projecting over it so that I won't have to change too much, so that I can keep my emotional equilibrium. Because if you've ever, I mean, if you've ever seen someone, and again, as a pastor, people call the pastor when they might have called 911, but it's not necessarily 911. And so, you know, everything is just coming apart. And so, well, the pastor's sort of this, but you don't know who else to call. That's the person you call. So, and then you watch people sometimes lose it. I remember I was in college, and a minister in a nearby church I was friends with, his son had another son who was deeply suicidal. And I remember, you know, people were doing what they could to, he was an immensely talented guy. The guy actually, the suicidal guy actually was the pianist at my wedding eventually. But he, you know, growing up, he was tremendously talented musician. Everybody looked at this kid and thought he's going to go places. And then he hit his, you know, early adult years and just became enormously depressed and very suicidal. And I was at college, and I just went to visit my friend, knocked on his door, and his father came to the door. And his father was just, I had never seen. So this was a minister that had seen, you know, put together in the pulpit, in control of himself. And here he's in his son's dorm room. And just by the look at his face, it was like, this person's life has been shredded. And he's a minister. He's supposed to have the answers and have things together. But the, you know, what he's dealing with his son is just shredded him. And you get the sense that, you know, in terms of the world, everything's just always sort of, the more human beings control this world, the less stable it's all gonna be, because we're not that well put together, which is the exactly opposite of what people think. No, we're in control of things, and I'm especially in control of me. And I look at people and I think, not anywhere much as you think. So we're in kind of crazy times. And, you know, Bitcoin, of course, has a reputation for, you know, these are crazy people playing around with imaginary currency. And that's, you know, Bitcoin is a fairly regular spam that I have to delete from my comment section on YouTube. Oh, look at this whole thread of people talking about Bitcoin. Why would they talk about that when none of my videos about that? You know, out you go. So what are you seeing?
Well, we are, what I've been saying for, and I think that this pattern or this idea coming to fruition, this is something that I actually started saying it years ago, but really started saying in, you know, when all this stuff happened in March in 2020, as I said, well, we're in a new mystical age. Like, we're moving out of, it's basically the same type of transition that happened with the fall of Rome. But see, only the West fell. The East, quote unquote, right? The East stuck around. But in either case, they moved from the materialist to the mystical, and the adoption of Christianity, obviously, in the Byzantine Empire. Very mystical. That early Christianity, I mean, you're not getting much more mystical than early Christianity. The Desert Fathers and the things that they were doing. Even, there are even saints. I mean, Saint Mary of Egypt, right? That's I really truly believe she's my patron saint. But you go and you read her life story, and it's like, oh, did this woman really exist? Right? It's like, it's less historicity than even Jesus, certainly. To where it's like, oh yeah, this Saint Zosima was this monk who was in the middle of a fast for Lent was the only person who saw her ever. And then she walks on water. She gets transported to all these different things. She levitates above the ground while she's praying. She does all of this. And then he passed the story down in the monastery. And then Saint Sophronius decides, hundreds of years later, that he's going to go to the monastery, get this story, write it down, and she's a saint, canonized. And it's like, okay, you know what I mean? Like, okay, you think the church isn't a completely mystical entity? You might want to look through that list of highly venerated saints and see that you've got some that may very well be a ghost. Like, you may have a ghost saint on your hands, right? And so, but her story is incredibly real. And what strikes me, and I think what Sophronius was pulling out of it, and probably why this story continued in this monastery that had a tradition of all of the monks during Lent would go into the desert and fast. So it's a mystical monastery that they would all go into the wilderness and fast for Lent and not talk to anybody and go somewhere where they wouldn't see each other, right? To go into this level of, that's a high level of mysticism and asceticism. And why did this carry on? I think one of the reasons that carries on, and the big thing that I took out of it, is this monk, Zosima, he encounters her naked and he's scared. And then he gives her his cloak. And so that's when you see the icon of Saint Mary of Egypt. It's a naked woman covered with something, right? And she's old and withered by the sun, and she hasn't eaten, and there's all these stories about her. And then he says, are you a demon? What are you? And she says, no, I'm here. And she explains that she's been fasting and following the Lord, and gives her story to him that is a very mystical story of an experience with an icon of the Mother of God, and being not able to get in to see the true cross in Jerusalem, and all of these things, and how she was a wanton woman and these things, and how it transformed her, and how she came down and went into the desert. And what strikes me so much about it is, he asked her to pray for him because she's obviously way more holy than him. This is a young monk. He's not been in this monastery for very long. He's not been in the habit for very long. And she wants him to pray for her, right? But she's like, all right, I'll do it. And she does. And he looks up and she's levitating. And then she starts talking to him and she starts quoting scripture. And then he says to her, well, I thought in your story, you're quoting scripture. So you've read scripture? And she's like, no, I've never read it. I don't know how to read. I've never even heard anybody read it or sing it. But the Spirit of God, which is alive, teaches a man knowledge. And it is very interesting to me that a great bishop of the church would choose to go out of his way to find a saint who said, in essence, scripture is irrelevant. That seems a very interesting thing to us, modern day people. And certainly if you were to talk to anybody who is not a Christian, and nobody can be, I mean, I know you like Tom Holland and I do too. And it's like, nobody is not a Christian in Western society, but those non-practicing Christians, let's just say, and you say, Christianity, and they say, I'm not going to live by some book. Right? That's their response. It's what some old book tells me and this and that. And it's like, well, isn't it very interesting that actually, if you go back, you've got bishops who are saints, who are going famous, who are patriarchs, who are going back and saying, well, here's a saint who says it's not needed. The Spirit of God can teach you these things anyway, without the scripture whatsoever. Right? And so what we're entering now, I think, and this is going to be an interesting opportunity, and it's going to be a transformative opportunity for the church as well. But I think it's something that Jordan Peterson, I've been saying, and maybe you caught this, but I've been saying Jordan Peterson is the pattern of John the Baptist. And he is that transitionary figure, and he is helping us to transition to his biblical lectures. When he announced he was going to do them, I tweeted out and I was like, this, you don't understand. People have no idea. He was still not that known at that time. I had interviewed him on my own show in February, and he was not. And it was funny because he reached out right before and was like, we're scheduled for 60 minutes. Do you want to do 90? And I was like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? And it's crazy enough, that video, it's just, you can look, Vin Armani, Jordan Peterson. He said some things in there that were the first time he'd said a lot of things, and because I had been absorbing things. It's got like 10,000 views.
Yep.
I'm very pleased about that in many ways. I'm very pleased because, like I say, receipts. Receipts. I've got the receipts. So I knew who he was, and I even asked him in that interview. If you listen, I say, "So what are you a prophet?" I asked him straight up in that interview, "Are you a prophet? What are you?" And when that came out, I knew. I said, this is going to be one of the biggest cultural things. And I immediately booked a ticket for the August 1st event, which, by the way, after that, I basically had a road to Damascus moment. I had 3 days when I came back. Luckily, my wife and my daughter were in Russia visiting their babushka, her grandmother. Thank God. But I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep, and I felt like I was on a psychedelic trip. I knew the feeling very well. I was like, I'm on a psychedelic trip for 3 days. And by day 2.5, I was very worried. I was very, very worried that I can't live like this. If this is not going to go away, because by 2.5 days of something and you've had no chemicals or anything, you're like, oh, maybe this is permanent. Maybe I've had a psychological break. This is going to be bad, but I was like, well, but the state that I'm in, if I stay like this, I'm certainly not going to worry about it, but I am kind of concerned about my wife and my daughter and these sorts of things. What I found interesting was, what I wanted to do, the only thing that made it calm down even a little bit and me be able to like handle things. And I think you'll get the reference that I'm going out and walking for long distances. I was walking maybe during those days. It wouldn't shock me if I was walking 10 miles a day. And there's an interesting person who's been having a similar experience where the only thing that helps him is to walk for 10 miles a day. I also found it very interesting. My spiritual father gave me a prayer that's beautiful prayer to Mother of Mary, the softener of hearts of evil men, which is a very well-known and a beautiful icon as well, which has Mary with all these swords that are coming down, and she's levitating the swords, right? It's absolutely gorgeous in many different forms. My spiritual father has actually painted one because he's an iconographer as well, as you might imagine, a former tattoo artist. And I love his particularly, but the prayer is he said, well, this is an akathis. So, well, what's an akathis? He said, well, it means you can't sit down when you pray it. And it occurred to me later that Jordan Peterson has akathisia.
It's interesting.
And I said, but he won't acknowledge that what's going on is a spiritual travail. And I think that's to answer your question of where are we, he is the key to where we are. We have moved We have transitioned from a material age to a mystical age. He is a transitionary figure in the same way that John the Baptist was. He has all the access to everything. He's experiencing all of the mystical. He's experiencing it, as we all are. They just announced, I found this and I was like, I've been waiting for this one because I'd been announcing, oh, this is coming. They just announced in France that they have found a strain of COVID that cannot be detected by the PCR test. I said, well, that's a very interesting type of virus, a virus that can't be detected by any material. How do you know it exists? Oh, that sounds familiar. What age are we in? I think it's very clear. And yet, as materialists, those of us who are going to be ground under the wheel are going to deny it. And Jordan Peterson is an example to you as a metaphor of what happens when you experience all of the mystical with all of the symbols in the fullness of your life, and then you deny where you are. And you say, I'm still in the material. And that's how John the Baptist lost his head. He shouldn't have been talking about Herod's marriage. He was beyond that. And had he not, he would have stayed alive. No question. And that's how Jordan Peterson lost his head. I mean, really, Paul, like, do you care about the section of his message that has to do with the postmodern neo-Marxists? No. Do you?
No.
Exactly. Like, he literally could cut all of that out and the impact of his message wouldn't change. Just like John the Baptist could have simply ignored the palace intrigue and the power of his message wouldn't have changed. And this is, I see this because I was part of the libertarian community. I see some people are able to make this move. And what will help people through this move, it is tradition. People have got to find the church. If they're having a difficult time with this, and for the people who are not spiritual or who are very rationalist, I say, then take it to the material, then fast. Then fast. Then do a 3-day water fast. I'm not telling you to do drugs. I'm not telling you to do psychedelics, because the people who have done psychedelics in the past are already there. They already know this. This is not for them. Right? Now is not the time to go out and do psychedelics. You're going to mess yourself up. The setting is wrong. The world setting is wrong. Like, you got to do psychedelics when things are good. When everything is calm and comfortable, you don't do it. You're going to have a bad experience if you do it when the world is like it is. I'm saying fast. 3 days. You don't believe in God? That's fine. Fast. See what happens. First off, it's just great for you, for your immune system. Like a 3-day fast, it resets your immune system. Do it. See how your life changes. And then, move forward from there. People have got to get into the mystical age. That's where we are. Like, you've got to get there, because you know what? The adversaries are already there. The adversaries, the people who want to control you, are already telling you that there are viruses rolling around that can't be detected by any test, and they're telling you that's science. So, and they're going to use that to control you. They're going to use that to enslave you. And they're going to use it to shut down the churches, which they already have. They're going to do it. They're going to use it to prevent you from being able to take the sacraments, which they already have. They're going to do all of these things. They're going to do it to prevent you from gathering in fellowship with others, which they already have. And they're going to do it on a mystical basis. They're going to do it by telling you there are literal evil spirits that only they can see, and that is science. And that's where we are. And so if people want to, everybody's going to suffer. I'm not saying anything new, right? Everybody's been suffering. I'm not making some gloom and doom prediction. It's like, well, you had the last year. I'm saying it ain't getting better. Everybody's going to suffer, but the question is, are you going to suffer needlessly? And as far as I can tell, the only way to add some meaning to the suffering, and it's exactly what Jordan Peterson has been saying all the time, it ain't just clean. It is clean your room, but it's not just clean your external room. It's clean your internal room, because what's going to fill the room? Like, you need to clean the vessel so that it can be filled. Right. And that is the Christian metaphor. Like,
that is the Christian metaphor.
That is it. And so that's where we're at. So for me, and I was baptized by Jordan Peterson. Literally. The Holy Spirit came down. That's what that was. And it's undeniable for me. And so I was baptized by Jordan Peterson. And you were baptized by Jordan Peterson. And so many people listening were baptized by Jordan Peterson. And he's been gone throughout the troubles of the last year. Conveniently lost his head. And so now where we're at is we have to take the next step, and people like yourself have a big part of the key.
Well, it has certainly been a strange ride, and it's been a strange ride for me. Well, I've pestered you, and you've been very generous with your story and very generous answering my questions. Anything you have that you want to touch on, or anything you want to ask me?
I've got tons that I want to ask you.
Okay, go for it. Sorry I took so much time with my questions.
I've got tons that I want to ask you. So I want to ask you about something that you wrote in the last email to me, and something that I've heard you say about experience. I don't remember which presentation it was, where you said something like the experience won't last. And then you also said to me in the email something about, like, I want to quote it right. I don't want to quote you wrong, but it was the difference between experience is great and everything, but the communal is what sustains, something to that effect, if I'm getting it right. And I just wanted you to, like, pull that apart and explain where you're coming from on that, because it is so counter to my own experience that I use the word experience. It's so counter to it's so counter to what I know to the core of my being, that I just want to understand what it is you're saying.
Well, let me say it this way. So when you talk about the preacher by the pool at Saddleback, and you say, I mean, this is very similar to what Jordan Peterson said in terms of why he doesn't believe the church, because they stand there and they use words, and people listen to the words and they say their life doesn't cash the check the words are writing. Okay. And so think about it this way. You've had all these experiences. What these experiences have manifest in your life is a husband your wife can rely on, a father your daughters can rely on, a son your mother can be proud of. I hear a lot of people talking about the experience. The experience is there as part of the entire picture, which is heaven and earth coming together. And I really loved Peterson's take on Piaget, and I think that's right, because on one of my question and answers, I talked about the resurrection. C.S. Lewis makes the point with the resurrection. Everybody focuses on, when they talk about the reality of the resurrection, or the physicality of the resurrection, that it's the first 5 minutes. And Lewis says that's completely wrong. The point of the resurrection is that the Spirit of Christ now moves into the physical realm through people. And the manifestation of that is not, the manifestation isn't, okay, I am going to just have awesome experiences. Now, in some ways, certain churches have, why have certain kinds of churches just gone basically using music as, in some ways, a psychedelic? And if you go to many churches right now in the world, you get a few thousand people together, you get the best musicians you can, and you get the best worship leaders you can. And basically what you do is you take those people into the heavenlies. And I don't I'm not part of, I don't want to get into a fight of whether you should have a cathedral with a dome and icons, and all of that does the same thing. In a sense, all of these are ways to trigger, to get people in that moment out of their bodies and to commune with the Lord. But we all understand that if you're, the Apostle Paul says this, if you have this experience, it has to be translated then fully into the world. And so Jesus' miracles were, I mean, we have the record of his words, but his miracles were his teaching to the people. That was, but the problem, and he kept complaining about the audience because he says, I gave you bread and you want bread. And of course you hear that and you think, well, you just said you gave us bread. And he's saying, you're not understanding what the multiplication of the loaves and fishes mean, because you are looking for the manifestation of the miracle, but you are not looking for the miracle himself. I am the miracle himself. And so then, of course, in John 6, he says, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you can have no part of me. And so I in no way want to discount the mystical, but the point is not the mystical alone. The point is what the mystical generates, and not just in the individual, but how that generates through the community. And so if you have, let's say, a traditional church setting where you have the priests and the monasteries and the cathedral, all of that is intended to pass from the temple out into the people. And this is actually very clear in the book of Ezekiel, if you read that book, because when the temple is corrupted, the entire land is weak and unable to withstand the Babylonians or the corruption or everything they have to withstand. And so it's that way. I hear a lot of people seeking experiences, and it's like, first of all, and I warn people about this with God. Part of the biggest lie that has been perpetrated in our culture in terms of religion and spirituality is God is Disneyland. And so then they read the Old Testament and they're like, oh, this God is not someone you just walk up to. But I see modern people do that. I went to Yosemite once with a friend and his daughter was, I don't know, 12 or 11. And we're in Yosemite Valley, and there's this beautiful buck with a full rack. And she starts walking up to this animal and I'm like, that is a wild animal. You need to respect that animal. You think you're watching a cartoon where this is Bambi and you're just going to walk up and pet it? That animal can take you out. People hit these animals with their cars and the animals run away. That's how powerful these animals are. And you're not respecting it. Well, people do exactly the same thing with God. And they think, well, God is just going to give me cotton candy. And it's like, well, where on earth in the world would you get that impression? Only in Disneyland, which is the furthest thing from real in some ways than anything else. So that's my point on experience, that, and this is exactly why, let's say in the Roman Catholic Church, where they're having all this trouble with, pedophile priests and all of this. Well, of course that's destroying your system. Because on one hand, you say, I have communed with God, and then the rest of your life is this mess. And we all get that. So that's my point about mystical experiences. People are like, well, I really want to have a mystical experience. And I think,
no, you don't.
That's exactly what I think. I think, no, you don't.
No, you don't.
I really want to hear from God. And I think, no, I really doubt it.
You don't.
Because
you don't.
Well, I don't believe that stuff in the Old Testament about this God who is mean. And it's like, and this is part of it. Well, have you not been paying attention? Go and pet that buck with the huge rack and tell me about God. Because the real world is like that. And we have quite frankly, by the grace of God, in many ways, created an environment where there is safety and security, and all these things are fine, but we've been deceived by it. And this has, and a lot of this sickness has manifested itself in the church. So that's my point about the mystical experience. I don't have a problem with mystical experiences. I do have a problem when people say, well, that's the goal. No, the goal is the renovation of heaven and earth. The goal is the entire thing. It is not escape. It's not escape into an experience. And any mystics that you read, any people that will tell you that. I know people who God has used to do miraculous things, and they don't, they completely respect the power, and they know what it costs them, because, and again, this is right in the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul says, I have had visions like none of the rest of you. And so but then I have this thorn in my flesh, and everybody keeps wondering, what the heck is that? You don't need to know. And I said, okay, Lord, obviously I'm on good terms with you because I've had these experiences. And God says, no, I am, because, my strength is made perfect in your weakness. And this has been the story throughout the Christian church. It's a story at the center of the gospel. And no, if you're pursuing miracles or mystical experiences, or if you're pursuing all of this because you think this is going to give you status, or this is going to make you happy, or you're not, go somewhere else, please. Because that's not what any of this is about. Because if this world is such a place that the Son of God would have to be butchered on a cross for the sport of his cultural enemies, if that's the kind of world we're living in, then why would you think that, oh, I just, mysticism is like Disneyland, but, and it's like, no, it's not serious. So that's my point.
I mean, that's actually very, very helpful for me, Paul, like getting back to, I mean, my own, because I am struggling and I wrestle, and I mean, I struggle with him constantly. And if I'm honest, while men have decided over the last year, they've heard some of the things that I'm saying, and they've traveled here and seeking something. And I've said to them, I'm not a priest. We can pray together, and we can talk together. And that's what I can do for you. Besides that, now I have a priest. It's like, if you want to go through Orthodox catechism, if that's where you feel drawn, fine. But if what you want to do is you want to pray and you want to talk, I can do that. And it seemed that that's what they wanted to do. And with the men here, I talk a lot about, and I dispel a lot of the ideas that this is going to keep you, the idea that this practice is going to keep you safe from suffering, or that there's safety in this. And that if you reach out to him, as I do, as my system of prayer is, like, what I'm doing is I'm reaching out to him for two things: tell me what to do and give me the strength to do it. That's it. And I'm going to do it. Tell me what to do. I'm going to do what you tell me to do, and then give me the strength to do it. And that's it. And he's never asked, he's solved all the problems, not in the way that I maybe would have wanted him to do it. He's kept his every promise. Crazy. It's just like, just do it. He asks you to do it. Just crazy things where it's like, huh? And then it's like, watch. No, just watch. But it is painful. And I've tried to, and one of the reasons why I felt a need, and it was interesting, the same conversation where I reached out to my spiritual father trying to say, I think I need to be in the church. He said to me, before I could even say it in our conversation, you need to be in the church. And he hadn't been pushing me for that at all. He had been, it was not, he would have continued on as my spiritual father, whether or not I said that I need to be in the church. But the reason why was because, I mean, I have the capability and I understand how to take it that far. And he had even said something and warned me, and I didn't understand at the time. He said to me, well, the reason why the saints are there and the reason why these practices are there is because God is too holy and you don't understand how holy he is. And that's the thing you're saying with the buck.
That's right.
Right. And I didn't get it at the time because the things that I had been dealing with before, those powers and principalities, are not that holy. You can get real close up to them and you can touch them. And it feels pretty good for a while, right? They're sucking out of you, they're a parasite.
That's right.
But God's too holy. And I will say that, like, I started to approach in that way because I started to get a little comfortable. Oh, you're doing all these cool things. We're buddies, right? And I started to approach spiritually, and I literally wound up in the emergency room. And they're looking at me, and I thought I was having a heart attack. I'd been going through something, my chest, and I'm struggling, and I'm like, oh my God, my body. And there was a point I called my wife to come home from the beach and said, I think I'm having a heart attack. Take me to the emergency room. And they hooked me up to an EKG, and they did all these things, and the doctor comes in and he's like, man, there's nothing physically wrong with you. I'm like, there's gotta be so. And I was like, oh, okay. All right. I get it. And I think that I have been, I mean, I feel that I'm being, maybe I need to be more, so I thank you, because it's making me think that perhaps I need to be more discerning, and perhaps that is the lesson. Because as I've said, when people have asked me to speak to them, I have always said yes, because that's what I've been told. And part of it is I'm giving you the strength so that you can bear witness. And it's not about you holding this to yourself like you did in the past, because it gave you power. And these guys wanted you to hold it to yourself so that people could think something else was happening, or that it was coming from you or whatever. But what I've been given is like, no, it's not, you're not supposed to hold this in. You're supposed to speak about it. But I feel that perhaps what it is that I am not being discerning. And that's something that I probably need to pray on, is that not everyone probably should I be talking to about all of the things that I'm talking about. Because, or not everyone is a person for me to have a conversation with, because I think that the tenor of this is considerably different. The two of us talking, what somebody will pull out of it is considerably healthier, and I don't want to use the word safer, but it's more full than I think what somebody would pull out of this if I wasn't talking to somebody that had the background in scripture and tradition and all the other things, literature, history, that you do, if that makes sense. So I really do appreciate that. I really do. It's very helpful for me.
Well, thank you. You said it very well. This God is a holy God. In the book of Revelation, the great and the small of the earth call out to the mountains to fall on them, to shield them from the face of the Lamb and the one on the throne. I mean, that's what we're dealing with. And so, no, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, I don't know what else to say. It's a lot. I feel like I don't know. This is very transformative. I appreciate you. I appreciate you offering to talk to me, and yeah, I was curious. Again, I listened to the video and I talked to a lot of people, and then you responded, and I thought, well, and I also, a big problem that the church has is, so when you described your priest, that doesn't surprise me at all, because I've seen priests and preachers that, have come out of jail, that have
I mean, these screens that we live in the midst of have images on them that are generated from the imagination of some of the most um, sheltered people on the planet. And so these pictures of what you get of the church, of the clergy, they're just lies, because there are many um, people don't have the people don't know what the church is like, and it is in sometimes it is so banal, but other times it is so powerful. And I love how you started with, you didn't want to go to Sunday school because, given, I mean, you also sent me this this video when Peterson, I mean, there's a few videos out there when Peterson is talking about, the experiences that he has had. And one of the issues, if you listen to enough Peterson and you listen closely, he is the kind of person that has, and again, what you've described yourself, I know others like you, they just have these experiences. And some people don't, and some people do. And Peterson is clearly one of the people that stuff happens to, because it just keeps happening, and he himself knows it. But that's what this world is made of, all of these different kinds of people. And so, I can totally understand how, as an altar boy, Sunday school, I'm not going to go to, I mean, all the action is happening. All the action is happening in here. This is where the action is. And you could see that. A lot of people can't see that. And that's okay, because, God makes how many different kinds of beetles, and God, I mean, people, the range among people is just completely enormous. Yet each of us, because of this projection thing, really wants to imagine, oh, the whole world is like me. Oh, okay. You can believe that if you want to. You just can't see through your projections very clearly. So no. And so I just had a sense that, oh, this is an interesting guy. And I did also want to, and I was thinking about making a video about it, but I did also want to address my take on it. And again, our language is so difficult with this stuff, on mere experience, because people seek it, but it's like I'm going to try on this new VR headset, or I'm going to try a new computer game, or okay, with drugs it can be more immersive. But it's like none of us respect. I've seen plenty of people high on plenty of drugs, and we look at a person who's high on something, and we don't say, oh, I want to be like them. No, we say, wow, if they're high on heroin all the time, that's not anyone, nobody wants that for their child. So anyway, so I watched the videos, and I thought I'd really like to talk to this guy. And plus all the Bitcoin and the Saipan and it was, but you have to, and again, one of the things that I've learned as a pastor is, number one, and you knew this given what you spent a lot of your life in, because people project so much, people like then to mask themselves in, it can be fine clothing, it can be wealth, it can be status. People mask themselves in all of this stuff because it gives them status and it gives them power. But when the curtain is pulled back, there's pain. They're just dying. They're just dying for someone to sit with them, listen to their story, treat them like a human being. And the world is just aching for that. And as a pastor, you see it all the time. And most of what I do is you sit down, and whether they're a homeless person or a pillar of the church, they just want to be loved, and they just want to be loved. So that I could see that, I could hear that in your story.
Yeah, I mean, and I am very much I am very much antisocial and very much a loner. So I have always pulled from the spiritual. I have found great, I would say that my companions have been the spirits, take that as you will, right? But I will say that it has been life-changing to be able to have finally to get to a point, and of course it's not finally, like my relationship is like where it's at day to day, I feel it growing, and everything, you know, and it's there's obviously no end to where that relationship is going. But to, you know, to travel through those phases, and, you know, if anything, I would love for people to be able to have the experiences, but I think also everybody's had the experience of the mystical over the last year if they will really step back and look. If they will really step back and see that your understanding of the way the world works, how things happen, the speed at which things can happen, the miraculous nature of things coming out of nowhere, how belief shapes reality, all of these in good ways and bad ways. Sometimes, and I think a lot of it has been in bad ways recently, but maybe that's enough, because at least you can't deny that. At least you can't call it at least you have to deal with it. And so that's if anything, I would hope that if I can talk with people about their experiences, then I'm very happy. My daughter is crying for me. If you can't hear her in the background, I'm probably gonna have to.
Well, let's land the plane then. But Vin, this was a pleasure. This was really a pleasure. I thank you so much for sharing your story, and for giving me this time. And yeah, we can do this again. I would love to, Paul. It would be my pleasure. All right. Thank you. Go attend to your daughter and say hi to her for me.
Thank you. I will.
All right. Bye,
Paul.